The image control effect category can be used to change colors within the image, and it also allows us to do some contrasting, similar to the adjust category. However, in certain parts, certain effects, we have a little more control of the image. Here you can see that I can change color. And if I selected a color within the actual composition, you can see that I can change just certain colors rather than all of them. Whereas in the adjust category, I would be working with the entire image and not just a few of the actual pixels of color. And you can see how here I changed each of the colors depending on what color was used in the image. And in this way I can create different effects in only certain parts of the image based on its color or its contrast within the actual image. And this is different from the adjust category, which will use the entire image to create its calculation. The noise and grain category allows us to add a sort of randomness to certain points of our actual image. As you can see here, I have a grain added to this image. And though it looks a little messy in this layer here, if I were to apply it to a solid layer, you can see that, let me turn off this layer, you can see that the image, which would normally appear very flat, now has a little bit of a depth to it, and it doesn't appear so computer generated. So if we were using it to, say, create a frame for something, for an image, we could add this noise in if we wanted the frame to not be so clean. And we can also add in blurs over these noise areas in order to get a nice contrast in the actual image itself. We also have let me turn this back on, effects to control this type of noise and grain. Here I'm going to get rid of the noise, and you'll see that by turning this up, oops, that we slowly get more blurred areas of the picture. And this is because it's taking pixels that are by themselves in color. So if I have a little black spot in the middle of a gray area, it'll take that black spot and sort of blend it into that gray area. So if I were to turn this up, you can see how it blends the like colors together in order to create a more smooth image. And that's what we would use these types of effects for, in order to create more of an organic feeling to the actual images and to clean up any dirty looking pixels that might be somewhere within our image that we can't really see, but when we finally output it, it may cause problems if we don't correct it. If we want to create the illusion of 3D, we can use the perspective category in order to create this effect. Here you'll see that I've applied a drop shadow, and I'm going to move this just a little bit so we can create this effect. But you'll notice that now I have the effect that this layer here is a 3D layer, when in actuality it's still only a 2D layer. It's just using the trick of using that one layer in order to create the drop shadow. And because we see this drop shadow, we automatically assume that this layer is up further in space than the layer behind it. Let me use the basic 3D, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Here we see the border for our actual red layer here, and if I was to turn this, you can see how the layer rotates, but you'll notice that the border for the layer is still in the exact same position. And that's because this is not an actual 3D layer, although if we needed a quick, simple way to create a 3D, let me turn this off. If we needed a quick, simple way to create a 3D object, we could do it in this manner rather than actually creating the layer and then turning on the 3D layer abilities for that layer. And so this way we can just use the effect. If we just needed to position this layer in a certain way, then we could just do that rather than going into the actual 3D and working to get this image. And so it's important to remember that this is still only 2D layers. We're just giving it the illusion of a three-dimensional figure, just in order to get a quick positioning for that layer rather than going into 3D and recreating that. The render category gives us the ability to create a type of effect from just about anything, really. You can see here that I have my basic layer, and I'm going to create a lightning effect. And basically the reason that I'm able to do this is because for these effects, the layer only acts as a border. If I drag my effect point outside of the area of the layer, you can see that the layer clips the effect at that position. And so I can create all different types of effects. This one here is lightning. If I created audio waveform, I could also input audio into this this effect in order to create a different kind of jaggedness within this line here. I can also add these effects to paths in order to create a different style of effect. So that way I can have my effect follow certain points in a path, and then the effect will be created in that manner, still using the effect points of the actual effect. And in this way we can create all sorts of effects that we normally wouldn't be able to get with the other types of effect categories. And so this will just give us sort of a rendered out idea of what the image would look like with that effect. And you can see here that we can add all different types of effects, and they'll appear differently based on the type that they are within the render. So it actually has no effect from the image unless we composite it with the original layer. The simulation category is very similar to the render category in that it creates an effect out of nothing, not really depending on the image itself. However, the difference is that if I were to apply the effect to a layer, there'll be an animation that we can create from the layer that will actually already have one placed onto it, and we can adjust the properties of that animation. Whereas in the render category, there would be no animation unless we actually set attributes in order to change the properties of the effect, and that way we could animate it along the timeline. Here, let me turn this to the rendered view, and you'll see that an animation plays, and even though I've only changed the way that we're viewing it, this animation was already applied to this layer once I placed the effect on it. And we can change all sorts of effects within the actual simulation. And here you can see that I've just changed the shape of the actual effect. So the effect is already set as how it will work, and we can just adjust the properties of that animation. And let me get rid of the shadow really quick. And you can see here that it's taken away my layer, but if I play along the timeline, we already have an animation that's been applied as soon as I apply the effect to it. But the border of the layer still acts as a clipping area for the entire animation, or the simulation effect. So once it reaches the edge, it'll no longer continue to be visible. So that's what it has in common with the render render category, but the render category does not already have an animation placed into the effect like the simulation category does. Transition effects are used to move an animation from frame to frame, or from scene to scene, without such a harsh cut from the frame of the original layer and the frame of the new layer. Here I'm going to add a simple block dissolve, and I'm going to show how that transition works. We normally have to add keyframes in order to animate the transition, but right now I'm just going to show you how it works by using the slider bar. So at 0% we have our original frame, and as we move along, we'll see that the screen begins to turn reddish color, and that's the second layer, which is the frame that I want to transition to. Once we're at 100%, you can see that the transition has completed and the layer has shown through because I've finished my transition to 100%. I'm going to delete this transition and put on a more complex one. Here you can see that the transition is already starting to take place, and as I drag along, the transition finishes at 100%, but we're still at the original layer. That's because some transitions will ask us for a back layer, which is the layer that we want to transition to. So if I selected the red solid, we'll see that it changes to the red solid at 100%. And then at 0, we're at our regular original frame. the percentages along it will be the transition, and then at 100% I will be in the new frame for the new layer.